I'm Xenia Zeiler from the University of Helsinki in Finland, and I'm super excited to be here to give this interview, of course. And we're going to talk about my research on games and gaming in India, in Asia more broadly, and about the interrelation of education and games.
Thank you for being here, Professor.
Thank you so much for having me.
Right. So, we were talking a little bit earlier, and you mentioned that you have a unique understanding on what games mean for education, right? So let's talk a little bit more about what you think about games and education and how you think they actually benefit each other.
That's a beautiful question. Actually, it's not a unique perspective I'm having, but on the contrary, I'm building on the work of colleagues,
right,
on my colleagues which have been working on this interrelation of education and video games, and on the benefit of games for education for quite a number of years. It's one of the academic disciplines which is upcoming. It's quite on the rise, as I believe it should be, because the intersection of education and video games is going to be increasingly important in the future. So there have been studies which talk about specific aspects of games and how they benefit in a very specific way to education. Let's take the immersion aspect. Of course, that's the first and primarily it's the most quoted aspect, a benefit, you can say, of games, which they bring into education as an additional value in contrast to books or to films, which might support a certain subject in teaching. It's a whole different thing with games.
Right. It also, I mean, what actually works for us is the fact that universally, the gaming industry is obviously has grown to a point where you see a lot more people actually gaming as opposed to watching movies or reading books, for that fact.
Of course, it has to do with the increasing influence of games in society at large.
Right.
And if we bring that into education, I believe that is going to be a very beneficial marriage.
Right. So, Ali, I was reading your research on video game development in Asia. Can you perhaps give our viewers a little bit more of a perspective on what your research is all about?
Yes, indeed. It's a larger project I'm doing with 3 colleagues. It's an international collaborative project which has been supported, for instance, by the University of Helsinki, my own university, and partly by other organizations. And we are looking into 4 different Asian nations which all produce games. And while we do have a researcher from Canada who is working on games and gaming in Japan, the other nations, we tried to not focus on the so-called established gaming nations of Asia. So we tried to look beyond these, and we have a project, a sub-project on games and gaming on the Philippines, and another sub-project on games and gaming in Nepal. Believe it or not, even Nepal produces games nowadays. And then there's me, working on India. So that's the broad scope of this project.
Right. So, obviously you mentioned that you've got colleagues from Canada and from all over the world. Now, obviously Finland and Canada is halfway across the other side of the world, right? What has actually brought on this interest in the gaming industry in India? I mean, what about India has drawn you toward spending so much time and research on actually understanding a little bit more about the industry and the country?
Again, I would say first and foremost, it's the understanding that we all should have, everybody in society, that games increasingly interact with society at large. We do have very specific studies which show in numbers that games are increasingly played all over the world. When it comes to game studies and game research in an academic perspective more broadly, we can nevertheless find still a large concentration of studies in the so-called Western nations, the more established ones maybe, that is the US, Canada, and Europe. And we are trying to broaden the spectrum. We are trying to acknowledge the global aspects of gaming. We are trying to put the global developments, the global, very specific sometimes interrelation of people from beyond these Western countries into the focus.
Right. So obviously you've been tracking the Indian game community for a while. Are there any games or any such cultural experiences that you have seen that have left a mark on you?
Yes, indeed. So when we are talking about games which are produced in India, it's a very interesting development, I believe, that we can see at the moment and which has been going on, to the best of my knowledge, for the last 3 years maybe. So we can find increasingly games which make use of what I would call cultural heritage.
Right.
That is, we would have elements of dress styles, color symbolism. We would have elements of dance, of music, of soundscapes more general, a total aesthetic impression which game developers from India, which I interviewed, very often called an Indian flavor. So they try to, often very consciously, incorporate their own background, cultural heritage, history elements also come into their games. And this is something super, super interesting. A lot of games are still in the development phase.
Right.
In the final development phases, I hope they're going to be out soon. Guys, go ahead. Yes, I'm really looking forward to a number of them.
So I'm going to put you on the spot, and I'm going to ask you to perhaps tell us a little bit more about a few of these games that you have actually actively been tracking.
Okay, let's start with the released ones maybe, and I'm just giving example. This is not an extensive list. There is much more interesting stuff going on in the game development industry in India at the moment than these, but to give some examples. Now, of course, we have Asura from Overhead Studios, Hi Sign, who did a wonderful job. So Asura is on Steam,
Right.
and it did quite well,
Right.
which is a wonderful thing when we are taking into account that, again, I'm quoting from my interviews with the Indian game developers, that a lot of them seem to have the wish that finally one big game produced in India hits the global market,
Right.
to create more awareness for the industry here. So there is Asura. Then we would also most certainly have Missing, a game for a cause,
Right.
which is free to play, and I encourage everyone to play it. I've been talking about the games a number of times. It's a game which tries to create awareness for the abduction of girls, which is a social problem. And in the game, you play as one of these girls who is abducted and who is trying to find her way to freedom. So it's quite an emotional, immersive aspect in the game. And then, when we speak about examples, again, just examples for forthcoming games. And there is a very interesting and, I believe, exciting game coming up, hopefully very soon, which is called Raji.
Okay.
Raji, an ancient epic. And that is a game which is, and I remember a quote from the website by the developers themselves, a game set in ancient India.
Right.
And also in Raji, and that is another level of the interesting things going on, you play as a girl. So you have a female protagonist, a female main character in the game. So you play as a girl, as this girl Raji, and you have all kind of adventures. And the trailers which are out so far are very promising. And of course, I want to mention another game which has been in the development for quite a while, and that is Antariksha Sanchar. And this game very, very toyfully blends elements of very specific Indian cultural heritage elements. That is Bharatanatyam dance.
Yes.
And you have seen...
I have actually seen their play at the Opera House a couple of weeks ago.
Yes, and I'm going to miss it tomorrow in Delhi because I'll be here, but I'm certain there will be other shows coming up. So you have this Bharatanatyam dance, and you would have elements, music elements of classical Carnatic music, and that is blended with steampunk in the game.
Yes, it's very, very interesting.
And on top of it, you have the historical character of Srinivasa Ramanujan, who was a mathematician, and that is all incorporated into this one game. again, which hopefully is out.
Very, very soon. Here's hoping. So thank you very much for speaking with us. Now I'm
Thank
going to leave the
you.
floor open to you. If there's anything that you would like the viewers to know about you, about your research, or even about what is it that you're looking to actively track in the Indian gaming community, which is why you're here.
I'm here to network. I'm here to meet you guys. I'm here to talk to you about your exciting projects. I want to assure all of you that you're actually creating awareness already, maybe when your games aren't yet out, just with trailers, which made me aware of some of the games which are in the production phase still. And I'm super excited to be here. And let me stop with that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.